Hi, everyone. Welcome to our October edition of Wireside Chat. I'm joined by, I'm Paul Wickover, the Associate Dean of the Online MFA, and I'm joined by Adjunct Instructor Melissa Hart, who is my co-host, and our guest tonight, Jerico Lenk, who is also an instructor in the Online MFA, and maybe some of you have had him as an instructor. I'm going to introduce him. Jerico writes poetry, prose, and everything lyrical between. His work unapologetically hops form and genre, driven by unique imagistic craft techniques he's dubbed active detail and writing with efficiency, and we'll talk more about that, or the strategic use of imagery, pattern, and tension. Alumning the university, boy, that's an unusual
You
verb.
got to make them up. You got to
Yeah,
do it.
right. Exactly. That's writing with efficiency for you. Alumning the University of South Florida English and History Classics departments, Jerico completed his MFA at the University of Washington with thesis work examining adaptation literature as both generative process and literary criticism, a Jane Eyre one-shot fanfic in which Jane and Rochester's orphan son hires a spiritualist to investigate hauntings at Ferndean Manor, accompanied by a set of example critical readings. His 2018 novel, The Missing, nominated for the Walter Dean Myers Award, investigates other Victorian ghosts from queer subculture to cocaine tablets. The visibility of queer identities is central to Jerico's work, not just for representation, but for reclamation of identities silenced by Western heteronormativity, like civic queerness in Greek antiquity, preserved by the adaptation customs of ancient storytellers. Currently, Jerico is working on a novel adaptation of the Apollo and Hyacinth myth, as well as a series of persona poems, revisiting the Homeric canon through the POV of Telemachus and Achilles. His work has received and or been recognized for prizes such as the Pushcart, Best New Poets, Best American Short Stories, and Passage North's Ray Venter Memorial Nonfiction Prize, with one of his recent Telemachus pieces published in the Washington State Poet Laureate's Queer Poetry Anthology. His work can be found online or in print with, it's F with R in parentheses, Friction, Twickenham Notes, Columbia Journal, Sonora Review, and a handful of other lit mags, sometimes even announcements across the MFA Genre 1 and Genre 2 courses.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Thank you. It's always so weird having an introduction read for yourself and just having to sit there like,
Yeah.
That's me. Yep.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Paul. Thank
The
you.
longer it goes on, you just have to kind of, what are you going to do? Just like,
Yeah.
yep, that's true. That's right.
Yeah,
I did
you're
that.
like, it's like, oh, I sent you all of that. Oh, you know what I mean? Ooh. No, but
But it's
thank you.
very
Thank you,
interesting.
Paul.
So, and the reason that I invited Jerico to this session was at the last MFA WIP, which is a Works in Progress event, and the next one is actually coming up very soon. He was our instructor reader and read just a wonderful excerpt from the piece that I mentioned in the introduction about the hyacinth myth, kind of modern retelling, I guess, in a sort of a YA format, I guess. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I very well might be.
I wouldn't call it modern, though I guess all of the retellings are modernized in a way just because of we're modern writers writing them.
Well,
right?
yeah, I didn't necessarily mean in a modern setting, although maybe it was, I can't remember. But what struck me about it was the voice. That's what I thought was so appealing and interesting. And I thought, well, I got to have this guy on Wireside Chat.
Oh, thank you.
So we can talk more about that book, but also about the uses of mythology in fiction, and I guess the revitalization of some of these ancient myths, which seems like very much what you're doing in terms of like, the ancient Greek myths and the I guess norms of what the introduction mentioned is like civic queerness, I guess. I'm just fascinated by all of this reclamation, I guess, and repurposing of some of this ancient history and culture.
Yeah.
So what is it that made you interested? What drew you to to this project, I guess.
No one else had done it. No one else had done it. There's a lot, so many of the retellings, right, of ancient Greek myths center around the Trojan War, but the women, which I think is fantastic, right? We're getting all of the women characters who have just been forgotten about in a way, right? And so I was like, well, what happens when we expand beyond the Trojan War? Right? Because I mean, there's so much you could write about with the Trojan War, but there's also everywhere else in myth that there are these voices that they recur as characters, but from certain characters' perspectives, right? Like Apollo has so many lovers, but we only hear about the lovers from kind of like the god side in a way,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so plus I just really love Apollo and his myths. So I was
He
like,
was
yeah,
always my favorite when I was a kid. One of the
yeah,
first books I got as a kid was Delaire's Greek Myths. I don't know if you know that book. It's just a
mm-mm,
fantastic book with just beautiful, gorgeous illustrations. And of course, to
mm,
me, they were all like superheroes. So
right.
Apollo was always my favorite.
Yeah, and then I mean, it's so funny because the Romans were the same way as us, right? They loved Ovid and his fanfic, should I say, of
Yeah, why
Apollo's
not?
lovers, right? Like, so it's
Yeah,
interesting to see how we've, you know, just as Western storytellers, we've been retelling those same stories in different cultures the whole forever. So, but yeah, I was just like, no one's done it, so I'm gonna do it.
yes,
Thank you for
there's
that
the
in the chat.
yeah. So what can you tell us about this particular myth, the myth of Apollo and Hyacinth?
Yes, so Apollo's list of lovers, mostly female. There are a handful of male lovers too. And so many of these god lover myths are kind of origin stories for things in nature, right? So I think Daphne became what was inevitably, I think, is an almond tree, I think. And then Hyacinth, obviously, upon his tragic death, became a hyacinth flower. And the way that the myth goes is that Hyacinth was a prince of Sparta, a Spartan prince, beat before way before the Trojan War, and Apollo tutored him. He was a mentee of Apollo, and they were playing discus, right? They were doing something,
They were like
and
throwing the frisbee around.
yeah, they were doing the frisbee, and there's two versions, two dominant versions, where it's either that Apollo accidentally struck him in the head with the frisbee and he died, or I think it's the Western wind god Zephyros was jealous because he also loved Hyacinth, and so he blew wind and it knocked the discus into Hyacinth's head. So I did a lot of research of like on both of those versions to kind of formulate this central plot of uh, which one I wanted to do and looking at the different sources and how I could combine some of them. So ultimately the idea of retelling this myth is in the actual myth, right? If it's Zephyros that had killed Hyacinth, Apollo chases him down to try to kill him to avenge Hyacinth's death. And I was like, that's very interesting. You don't see that a lot. Another god trying to kill another god because they killed their boyfriend. So that's kind of the premise of it is Hyacinth trying to stop it because it will cause war amongst all the gods. And because he was a lover of Apollo, they know that he could stop Apollo. So instead of being passed along to his eternal rest, no, not rest, but in the underworld, Persephone pulls him in and is like, hey, we got a task for you. So kind of like he's not a ghost, but he's not alive, right? So
Right.
it's just him kind of moving with the Hermes guiding, obviously, around these different places trying to find Apollo to stop him. So that's
That's awesome.
kind of where
I
I'm,
love
yeah, that's where I'm at.
I love that. So does he have a reward, a potential reward being dangled in front of him should he succeed?
You'd hope so. I can't remember in the early days of the planning of it. I can't remember if I did or not. I couldn't think of something that didn't feel too kind of packaged, right?
Yeah.
I'm kind of happily for now. person, right? When you want to
Okay.
think about genre conventions, but
Right.
when things feel a little bit too perfect, I can't stand it in my own writing. So I'm still trying to figure out a nice balance there. Um, he's not going to come back to life, but he's probably going to have a
Yeah.
nice afterlife. You know what I mean? So yeah,
Speaking of like genre and genre conventions,
yeah.
where would you see this story as fitting within the genre landscape?
Honestly, I would hope for something like historical fantasy,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, really it kind of comes down to where I think agent and publisher would think it would be best. But I would hope for it to be more there than I don't know. I don't know how you classify Greek myth adaptations, but I think something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm thinking of Circe and stuff like that, which
Right.
are like really
Yeah.
popular books. There's obviously a readership, a big readership for it out
Yeah.
there. Well, that's so
Yeah.
cool. And the other thing about it is, you've got this character, Hyacinth. He's kind of in a liminal space.
Yeah.
He's not dead, he's not alive. And looking back over some of your other work, including, and I'm going to space on the title here unless I look it up,
Oh, you're good.
including The Missing,
Hmm.
um, which involved ghost hunters in the Victorian era. That
Yeah.
seems like something that you're also interested in.
I love ghosts. No, I love the paranormal. I grew up sneaking ghost hunters where my mom couldn't see it, right? I've done ghost hunts. I don't know if anybody, I know someone in the chat had said they're from Puyallup. I don't know if you've heard of Colfax, St. Ignatius Hospital, way over on the east side of the state. But we just recently, last two Octobers ago, 2 years ago, partner and I, we went to, they have like all night ghost hunt. It's, I love that stuff. So on top of that, when I was younger, my obsession, my fixation history wise was 19th century Victorian London. Just the aesthetic, loved it all. But more, look, I loved the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes. I can't tell you how many times I've watched those movies.
Yeah.
But I had never realized how popular ghosts were to Victorian Londoners. The whole spiritualist movement and stuff like that. It's the beginning of different sciences that we have now, right? Is that spiritualist kind of exploring the things about energy and life and death. And I think that kind of transition into our modern science gets missed sometimes. So it was really just the best of both worlds for me. I was like, I love ghosts, love Victorian era. So,
Yeah.
you know, and they had paranormal societies then, the Metaphysical Society, things like that, Psychical Research Society. And so I was like, okay, so what if we did Ghost Hunters meets Sherlock Holmes, though? Right? What if
Right.
Scotland Yard had a partner who did just spectral investigations? So that was
Right.
kind of where that came from. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a natural. I mean, I'm just looking up really quick because I want to make sure I have the dates correct. I'm thinking of Madame Blavatsky, who was like the very famous spiritualist
Yeah.
in like the late 1800s,
Yeah.
um, who's gave rise to all the Theosophical Society
Yes.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
things
I
like
mean,
that.
there were so many cases too where people have gone to court because they were fraudulent psychics.
Yeah,
There are two things in the chat I wanted to hit, if that's okay.
do it. Yeah, but
Yeah.
but
So
let me read. Either you read it out loud, or
yeah.
I'll read it out loud for those, because this is also going to be a podcast, by the way. All
Oh,
of the
okay.
Wiresides are podcasts. So
Very
go
fun.
ahead, read it out, and then respond.
Yeah, so Winter had said, I don't know if this has been done, but it is along the lines of retellings and queer fiction. I have always wanted to put a spin on Dante and Virgil from the Divine Comedy. I love that you keep saying fan fiction because that's how I feel about retelling sometimes. And I just wanted to say, yes, fanfic. Do not shy away. Adaptations are fanfic.
Yeah,
Adaptations are fanfic, right? And I love that there's so much more kind of respect for fan fiction happening. That is really what I had mentioned or what the intro had mentioned about adaptation literature is that's what fanfic is. It's adaptation literature. So I guess Winter just wanted to hit your comment and say you are absolutely right and please do it. Truly,
Yeah,
truly.
I agree.
And then, yeah.
I mean, it's like you said, all of the retellings that Western culture has built out of these Greek myths are a form of fanfic
Hmm.
when you think about it. I mean, what is it
Yeah.
really?
It's a
Because we
call and
all,
response.
yeah, and we all have our own literary myths, right? The books
Right.
that really meant something to us that we go back to again and again. What are some of your books like that?
I gotta think of the formative ones, the core memory ones, right? Obviously, Song of Achilles. I go back to that all the time. Um, The Vampire Armand, Anne Rice's
Oh
Vampire
yeah,
Chronicles.
yeah,
I mean, that I picked that up when I was 16, 17, and it steered the course of my life in some ways. I mean, I know it
yeah.
sounds wild, but yeah, so in The Vampire Armand specifically, there is also one book from when I was in middle school. It was a middle grade book. It was called Bloody Jack. I don't know, maybe I don't know if anyone's heard of it. Every time I talk about it, people are like, hmm. But Bloody Jack was about a an orphan girl in not Victorian, but the one before Victorian London. Can't remember. Is that Regency? I'm not sure. Um, she was an orphan, and so she snuck onto a Navy ship by dressing up as a boy and became a Navy boy with the other Navy boys. And so it's this really awesome trilogy, but it was a very formative book because it had a lot more in it than you'd expect in a book that is published as middle grade.
Right,
And so that was very formative for me because I don't know that. Yeah.
right, right. I mean, there were cases of stuff like that
Oh
happening
yeah.
all through history. Um, Very interesting, but it's got that element of like gender uh um I don't know, passing or
The
you know ch-
subversion, right? Yeah.
yeah, right, right. And that seems also like kind of an element of your work.
Yeah. I just like rebelling.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, you can just, no, I think it's really important to kind of interrogate the gendered spaces of things, but in ways that are kind of taking power over the narrative in a sense, of not saying not it's not so explicit, right? But it's kind of saying, especially in the literary landscape, right? How that has shaped our social and cultural perspective of gender roles in a lot of ways. Thank you, 19th century London. Um, like kind of saying this image you've presented is not the reality, you know? And so interrogating it by kind of having characters like in Bloody Jack that are kind of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Subversion, I think, is the best word for me to explain
Right,
it, right? Subverting it.
right.
Yeah.
Um, I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions or comments, please put them into the chat and either Jericho will read them himself or we'll surface them up to him.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's one question for Sabrina. If I could put a pin in DAOs when we start
yeah,
talking about craft or teaching or anything like that. So just putting that pin there oh, I can actually pin it. Okay, I pinned it. All right. So DAO, we'll come back to that. But yeah, so do you want me to just go to the question, Paul?
sure, go ahead. I was actually looking for Dow's comment or whatever, but
I
yeah, go
pinned.
ahead to the question. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, there it is. Great.
yeah.
Okay.
So Sabrina says, I am currently writing a novel based on the myth of I didn't do Egyptian in school, Egyptian myths. So if I mispronounce this, I'm sorry. Bastet versus Apep from Egyptian mythology. How much did you focus on research for accuracy over taking creative liberties?
Great
Best, biggest
question.
question when it comes from adaptation, 100%. Um, so I'll try to keep this a condensed answer because one answer is I did a lot of research because I liked it and I
Mhm.
rabbit hole and I obsess. I'm not even kidding. I spent hours in the morning for a week or so building out a family tree of from the gods up to the Trojan War of every king I could, every member from anybody named in the regions. Just part of it, and that had come from, as far as creative liberties too, trying to figure out Hyacinth's family, right? Because they're real kings in records, these names, and trying to locate them in the ancient map. So trying to kind of bridge the gap between the characters and worlds in the myth and then the reality that they're linked to. And so I ended up building out a whole family tree as much as I could, to see also how he's only a couple generations away from the Trojan War. How is he related to anyone in the Trojan War, kind of thing, which then feeds into, when actually writing the book, you can reference those things and kind of play with time and then create thresholds for readers to kind of contextualize, because if they know who Hector is or Odysseus, right, they'll be able to kind of map their way with the characters. With something like mythology, you also have the fact that, I wouldn't, not the fact, but kind of just the eternal dilemma of we're missing some things. We don't have all the answers and all the connections, which I think is also partially why I made the family tree, is to kind of find where I could make my own. For example, according to myths, I'm going to put in the chat really fast a specific website that I use. It's tertiary. It's got a bunch of myths, but it has sources for everything. It has all the different regions for everything with ancient Greek. But one of the things I stumbled into was that, according to myths and historical records, which kind of are the same thing at a certain point, Hyacinth's father's sister is, forgot her name, such as an E. It's not Eurydice. Oh, it's an earlier Eurydice. Anyway, so his cousin is Danae, Perseus's mother. Right. So first of all, that's a way to contextualize for readers. But then at the same time, now I'm like, okay, well, how do I interact with that myth within my own retelling? Right. So what I ended up doing creative liberty wise is there's some kind of border skirmish that his father, Hyacinth's father and brother, have to go with the army. And his uncle, right? So the king, Danae's father, goes with him. And while he does, Danae stays with the family, with Hyacinth. And ancient times, marriage, you marry your cousin sometimes, right? They're talking about marrying Danae with one of the sons, like Hyacinth's brother, and Hyacinth's uncle judges Hyacinth, right? He's the youngest son. Why marry his daughter to a youngest son? So there's all this contention there. And so Hyacinth's mother, in how I was doing this, argued with him and kind of didn't curse Danae, right? But prayed to Zeus to get back at the uncle. Well, then we have Perseus happening afterwards, kind of thing. So I was like, how do I kind of interact with this myth? But that's where the creative liberty comes in, and it came from the research of who are these people, how are they related, how do I situate them with the other myths? Yeah,
That's
hope
very
that.
cool.
Yeah.
I mean, and you can put the family tree at the front of the book, right? So
No,
that
it's too
readers
big.
yeah. Well, it'll be a fold out.
Oh, true. Yes.
Well, I mean, what that reminds me of is like Ovid's Metamorphoses.
Yeah.
When you read that, it's like it's not like a series of discrete myths. It's like they
Right.
all are all moving in and out of each other, and all of the characters are connected in some way or another. And I feel like that fluidity is so that's one of the wonderful things about the Greek myths. And if you're able to draw upon that through your research and bring that to life and make those connections in your book, I think you're being very true to the
Right.
spirit of those myths.
Right. Exactly. And that's, especially part of why I love so many retellings coming out now about the Trojan War, is because the Iliad and the Odyssey, they were recorded after hundreds of years of preservation, right? Because this war they talk about happened, I think they dated it to sometime in the 1200s or 11 something BCE, but we didn't have it until they were out of the Dark Ages, hundreds and hundreds of years later,
Yeah.
right? But somehow this story that had such accuracy that they were able to recently date it had been preserved over time through all of these centuries just from
Yeah.
oral tradition. But that also begs the question then, how much was adapted along the way by the cultures telling it, right? Which
I
is,
mean,
yeah,
we have to assume a lot, I think,
right, yeah,
because it's human nature.
exactly. Yeah, Margaret
But
Atwood, right? You can't kill storytelling. It's just human nature. We're
right.
gonna do it.
But I mean, the other, to circle back to the idea of like, historical origins or historicity of the whole thing, for quite some time, the idea of the existence of Troy was a hotly debated
Right.
topic, right? It
Yeah.
was many, you know, archaeologists and historians considered it to be a myth. And the search for the historical Troy was looked upon as a fool's errand.
And then look what he
Or the,
found.
yeah, and then it was discovered.
It's
So I
wild.
think again, that mix of history and mythology, kind of the common roots or the connect, just the connections between them, or the way that they stem from a single source, maybe is a better way to
Right.
put it. But yeah, you're really plowing fertile ground, I think. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I hope so. You've got to finish it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's you got to finish it. There's
Yeah.
always that. Well, how far are you into it?
I'm not entirely sure. So it's
Okay.
been a tiny bit since I touched it because then I went into my master's program and my thesis took precedence.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but I would say it's a good chunk, right? I kind of outline as I go.
Yeah.
Not really, a fly by the seat of my pants, but I have like a bare bones outline, and as I'm working, things start to generate from each other in my head. So I'll go and I'll kind of add to my plot scene by scene. And so I think where I'm at right now is trying to solidify that plot outline according to like things have changed so far. Because since starting writing it, a couple of different things have changed as far as rearranging, or I might do something in it that's kind of different, where present, the story present, right? So Hyacinth interacting with Persephone and having and Hermes and going to all these different places, finding Apollo is written in the past tense, but then it's kind of braided with the past. So his life meeting Apollo, his romance with Apollo, up until the point of death, but that's written in the present tense, right?
Interesting.
And so I think I don't know why I started doing it, but I feel like it works. At least in my head, it's working because of the liminality of it, where the past is kind of the past is always present in our head, right?
Hmm.
So I think it was just a weird lyrical narrative choice when I started doing it, but I've really liked how it's moved. So that's changed the way the story structure has been moving.
Yeah.
So I've been revisiting the outline a lot, but I would say probably a quarter of the way in.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe a
No, that's
third. Maybe a third. We'll see.
that's it. It's interesting because you would think like if you were just kind of, coming to this from outside, you would go like, well, the stuff that's already happened in the past, I'm going to use the past tense for that. And then the
Yeah.
stuff that's going on now in the present, I'm going to use the present tense for that. But you flip that. Another case of subversion,
Yeah, we'll
perhaps.
see what happens. I like breaking rules.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool. And
Yeah,
and the other thing that I was struck by what you said there was the way that choice has impacted the structure
yeah,
of the novel. I mean, I think a lot of times students think a lot about structure, and they wonder like,
yeah.
well, what is the structure of my book? How do I build the structure of my book? And this is one way, right? It's like this is something that you wouldn't necessarily think would have a powerful effect on structure
Mhm.
necessarily, right? Because a book is going to have its structure regardless of whether you're telling it in the past tense or the present tense. And yet, I think it does make a difference. So, what is the impact of that on the structure of your book or of any book, that kind of choice?
I think just in the context, right, of writing something that is braiding the past and the present together, but swapping the tenses for the two.
Yeah.
Um, like like I like I said, it changes the way the story moves, even just in its flow, right? Because it gives different energies to both sections. But it also means that I've reorganized things in different ways. It's made certain scenes that were in the story present in a way not necessary because something in the past has fluidly kind of answered a question that the more traditional or the present area of the story had asked before. But I think the biggest difference is that because the past is written in the present, it's much more lyrical, so it moves more like memory. And because the present story is written in the past, it's moves more traditionally narrative. So on just a mechanical structural level, I think that's been the biggest impact, is rearranging things or kind of now having a flow that's more organic that I have to follow in certain ways.
Right. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
structure is something that is the, I guess you could say, is the shape of the book, but in a way it's also the constraints that the writer
Yeah.
willingly adapts on themselves in the writing of the book.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, is constraints that we willingly put on ourselves, right? I know I said I like breaking rules, but as the writer, sometimes you have to give yourself, like, not even sometimes, constraints always generate the best work. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just, I mean, if you have ADHD, which I do, you wait till the last second to do things because you have a constraint, right?
Right.
Not the best thing to do. But um, it did make me write some of my best stuff in school, though, the night before, I will say. But having structural and craft constraints really does push you to do things differently, and it might be hard. But when you go back and you look at it, I mean, it's going to generate some of your best work, right? Because you're forced to
Yeah.
move inside those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
In the chat, Kendall had asked about a podcast, and then Melissa, thank you for linking it. I don't listen to any. I actually listen to a bunch of true crime podcasts, but I have listened to some of Let's Talk About Myths, Baby, a long time ago. So I'm glad. Thank you for reminding me that that existed.
I've never heard of it. I'll have to check it out myself.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, let's see what else. I know we had before we began, we were talking about some other topics to talk about, but um, I guess we can jump into those now, and then we can circle back to some of this other stuff as
Yeah.
well. Or did you want to go back to the comment from Dow that you pinned?
So Dow, that comment I think kind of connects to the topics that we were talking about before we
Yeah.
came in here. So what Dow had said was, I love that your ideas came directly from wondering what if, and I thought that was very interesting because that is very much where my teaching comes from, right? When I teach anything, especially creative writing, um, it's the what if that powers things, right? That kind of asking what if, especially with outlines and stories in general, especially starting things, asking the what if this happens, what if that happens, right? And when I work with any writer, whether it's like member, a colleague or student, whatever, and I'm leaving comments during like workshop, it's always what if this, but what if that, right? What if this? So I just thought that was really interesting that you brought that up, Dow. Just how my mind works, I suppose, but I recommend it to anybody, right? Especially if you're in like, oh, sorry, the sun is coming in, like in a block, asking yourself what if with different things, um, or even just in revisions, right? It could be as simple as what if this character did this, what would happen, right?
Yeah.
It's yeah, always ask it, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to ask yourself that, because a lot of times you foreclose certain decisions because you
Mm-hmm.
prematurely answer that question without ever really asking it of yourself. You're like, well, the character would never do that. And so you
Right, but
just
what if?
say, yeah, exactly. But what if they did? What would happen
Yeah.
then? Or this can't possibly happen. It would screw my whole plot up. But what if it did?
Well, and it even works for thinking about just the narrative details, like when we think about character details. What if, so I'm teaching romance this term and then also next term. But for example, so we have the bad boy trope, right? Okay, but what if this character had socks that had cartoon characters on them, right? What does that say about the character? How does that impact everything else that you're writing and what the reader is getting about the character? So like just even when you're writing and it's those little details, like what if this habit was one of theirs? How does that affect everything else that
Right.
they're doing? Right? So
And I can't help but think again of subversion. You take a trope and then you
yeah,
kind of use those details of character or setting or whatever in order to kind of undercut it in some way
yeah,
or just, bring a different perspective to it.
yeah. Like I said, I
So,
like breaking the rules. I don't know.
yeah. So let me talk a little bit about teaching, or ask a little bit more about teaching,
Yeah.
because I think a student had asked me about that. I think he's here tonight. I think I saw him come in. Um, I guess I just, and I know that a lot of MFA students in the program are interested in pursuing a teaching career, and a lot of them specifically came in for that purpose,
Mm.
to teach creative writing. So I guess what I want to ask is a couple of things, like first, like on a practical level, how possible is it? What is involved in it? And secondly, just like in terms of a supplement to an artistic career, um, what, how do the two interact with each other, I guess, and maybe fuel each other?
Yeah. So practically, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because thinking about teaching, especially at a university level, higher education level, specifically creative writing instructor positions, there's not always a lot. That's the hard part about academia, is that sometimes there's just not a lot in the field that is open and available, which is the scary part. But I would tell everyone, do not let that dissuade you, just something to be aware of in general with academia, right? So I think this trend is changing. I mean, I guess I should say clearly it's changing or I wouldn't have a job, but I I think for a while it was that you had to have like a PhD to teach at some schools with creative writing, and I do not, and I don't think a lot of other people do
I
either.
don't.
And so yeah, I think that trend is changing. I had a teacher who told me, if you want to teach it, you need to get a PhD, and I was like, there's like 5 schools that offer that
Yeah.
that even offer the PhD in creative writing. But so if you want to go the teaching route, MFA, right? You want to get your master's, which you all are doing. So it's very exciting. And from there, practically, it's really just kind of, you know, making your connections, looking around, going to different places and thinking, what kind of school do I want to teach at? Right? Because there's all different types of creative writing departments and approaches, and then school atmospheres, right? So like University of Iowa is like the heart of the creative writing academia world in a way, in the United States. And so do you want to gravitate towards that kind of atmosphere, or do you want to, you know, it, it's kind of like knowing who you are as a writer, right? And who you are as a teacher. I don't know. I don't think, are there any like teaching practicum type things in the MFA with SNU? I
Oh
don't.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. There's
You
there's
find
like
out.
what if you choose there's two certificate choices. You can
Yeah.
either choose the certificate of professional writing or the certificate of online teaching of
Right.
creative writing.
Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah,
Right. Right. So and SNU has so many networking opportunities. It's really amazing. It really is fantastic. So take advantage of those for sure. Um, you had asked about the practicalities of it, and then I kind of lost my
yeah.
direction.
So the
So
other
is
one
there?
was yeah, the other one was just like did first of all, did you want to become a teacher? And
Okay.
secondly, like just the connections between your creative life and your teaching life.
Right. That yes, that balance as well. So as far as personally, I didn't know that I wanted to teach until I was back in school myself. I left high school at 16 with my GED and then took a couple years off. And then I just did not like what I was like, I'm a manager at McDonald's. I want to do other stuff. I like learning. So I went back to school at 20. And the reason I have double majors and a minor is I didn't want to leave. So I kept adding things. Um, and I just realized like being on campus, being part of this in this world, like this is I love this. I like learning. I like talking about what I learn with other people, and I want to keep doing it. And so I didn't really I think fully realize how much I loved teaching and how much it just kind of fit until I was in my master's program because the schools that I went to, if you taught, right, they paid the tuition, then you got a stipend, right? So I went to one of the schools that had that program. So I had to teach while I was taking my own classes. And I just loved it. So I was like, I would like to keep doing this. And I just have been. So that for me is kind of where it came from is I don't want to say I had to do it, but like I had to do it. And then starting to do it, I was like, I really love this. And as far as the balance between, that and the creative side, you know, the reality is that it's hard to balance sometimes because there's so much you're doing and depending on kind of how you are as a person, there are some instructors who know how to structure themselves and manage their time. I, and when it comes to things like working hands-on with students' work, I'm the kind of person that I would rather not structure it and just spend as much time with each student with each piece. And so sometimes when I run out of time not able to do my stuff for like my own writing, I know I bring it on myself, right?
Yeah.
But it's worth it to me because one of the best parts and honestly some of the most inspirational for myself as a writer is working with students and their work. Right? You're getting to see other people's stuff. You're getting to read stories. And that's always a good thing as a writer. Always. But then you're able to talk about craft and methodology with other people who are also thinking about craft and methodology. And so it ends up being kind of generative because you're thinking about, oh, I do these things and this person is doing these things and these are the impacts they have. So um, maybe you start doing something similar in your own stuff, right? So it can be intensive. For myself, I know that it is, again, a matter of I just throw myself into it. So in when talking about practical, right, with teaching and balancing for your own work and creative life, it really is just up to you and how you approach it.
Yeah. I mean, I know that for me, I never had any desire to teach creative writing or anything at all. Maybe because my mom always said I would be a good teacher, and I was like, no, that's not going to happen. Um, but finally, I was like driven to it sort of by looking for ways to support myself as a writer,
Yeah.
and I found that I really, really enjoyed it, and that my mom was right, that I was kind of good at it. But I would have to say, like, one of the most surprising things to me about it has been how much I've learned about writing. Like I thought I was
Yes.
coming in as a writer. I published novels and short stories, and so I thought, well, I know all this stuff, but I really
Mhm.
didn't. I thought I knew it, or I knew it on some level, but having to articulate it and
Yes.
explain it,
Yes.
then that really helped me understand it, and then just kind of paying attention to what my students were doing
Yeah.
because I've had some incredible students. I mean, every student has something that I've learned from, I think, honestly.
Yes. Yeah,
So that's
100%.
that's like a side benefit, an unexpected benefit of teaching.
It is. It is. And you're absolutely right where you feel like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing and then you get up there to explain it and you're like, how do I how do I
Yeah,
talk about this? So you
yeah,
have to keep learning. And then really fast before it disappears in the chat, Christopher had asked about teaching writing at the collegiate level.
yeah.
Scroll
There it
across.
is. Let
One
me
must
read
have
that one.
gotten, yeah, yeah. You
Yeah,
said you wanted to?
I've always assumed that to teach creative writing at the collegiate level, one must have gotten published on top of the MFA. Does that seem correct?
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah.
Um, For the most part, yeah. And it's scary sometimes when you're looking for jobs because for example, like U of Iowa, they're like two books with a mainstream large publisher, and you're sitting there like, I don't I don't have that yet. Or if you want
Yeah.
to do poetry, right? They're like, need to have one full collection in XYZ. So short answer, yes, published. Long answer, it does vary, right? But for the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big thing, yeah.
I mean, here at SNU, you have to publish a novel.
Yeah,
And not only that, I mean, it's like not last week, not
yeah,
like you self-published a novel last week. That's not going to qualify you to be considered for a job here.
right.
Um, and I feel like we're pretty open, really, because we're online only, and we're trying to be as uh, welcoming as we can to like students from every walk of life, students that
Yeah.
can't, that don't have a chance to go to other programs. But still, we want to make sure that the instructors here are have the necessary experience to be teaching them valuable lessons about not just writing but publishing.
Right. And I love that that's built into the program or into the classes too, right? Especially kind of because I do the genre one and genre two
Yeah,
courses, and there's such an emphasis on this as being like you are working towards being published. And it's funny because that's something that actually my undergrad emphasized more than my grad program,
yeah,
which I think is wild.
yeah.
It depends on the program.
It was never emphasized in my grad program. In
Yeah.
fact, if you brought publication up, it was like, you'd get dirty looks.
Mm.
It was like, how
Yep.
dare you? We're talking
Yeah.
about art here.
Right. There's that weird divide, and it's breaking down slowly, I think, right? But that
Yeah,
weird divide between academia and, literary writing and commercial writing. And it's like,
yeah. I
there's,
definitely,
yeah.
we're definitely seeing that breakdown. I mean, I don't think
Oh,
there's
yeah.
any question about it that you know, books that come out now that have kind of literary reputations, they almost always will have some element of genre
Oh, yeah.
fiction in them. Especially these days, it seems like speculative fiction has really been,
Hmm.
you know, adapted by a lot of otherwise literary writers because that's what they grew up reading.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a big thing I talk to students about all the time, right? Is like the readership generations are changing, right?
Yeah.
What we
Yeah.
all grew up reading, that's not what's being written anymore because we're the ones writing now,
Right. And the
so
gatekeepers are changing.
oh,
It's
thankfully.
not just, yeah, no, right. But it's like, the editors are,
Mhm.
they're younger than me now, and the agent, I mean, by far, and the agents are younger,
Yeah.
right? It's like just, definitely a changing of the guard for sure, which I think is very beneficial, to genre writers and writers of popular fiction.
And two, right, the digital era. I mean, Wattpad, LiveJournal, all of these content management places, there are so many writers that get picked up
Yeah,
by agents, right? Because they find their
100%.
published work. And then
Yeah,
I think the Captive Prince trilogy, I don't know if anyone has read that, but I do refer to that sometimes, right? That was a novel that was published on Wattpad,
yeah,
right? It was already, oh, that's a key thing too, right? If you publish your writing online, you can't publish it elsewhere really, unless someone picks you up. So,
yeah,
that's the point, right, of the example is that this was published online and then it was found and picked up and it was a bestseller.
yeah,
So the world is changing, right?
yeah.
So, mm,
No, definitely. In fact, I can't remember the name of it, but I just read about this novel that's come out. It's a big doorstopper of a book, and apparently it's just been breaking all kinds of sales records. And it's kind of like a Harry Potter fan fiction.
mhm,
That's how it began, and it kind
right.
of imagines this relationship between Hermione and oh, what's that guy? What's that character's name? The son of the
Draco,
really, yeah, Draco.
Draco.
It involves a relationship between Hermione and Draco, I guess under other names in the fanfic. So, it just goes to show, and that all began as a online, kind
Right.
of fanfic publication, and then it got picked up. And I guess, Shades of Grey or whatever that,
Yeah, 50
that
Shades of
series
Grey.
was called, 50 Shades of Grey,
Yeah,
began that way too.
yeah.
Yeah, J.K. Rowling has a lot to answer for in more ways than one.
Very much. Yeah. In more ways than one. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so the other thing, we're kind of drawing to the end of our chat. These always go by so quickly.
Yeah.
But I wanted to circle back to something else that you had mentioned just a minute ago, which was another one of the things that we had thought we would talk about a little bit, which is just like making connections in the
Yes.
MFA and the importance of making those connections and how does one go about doing that?
Yeah. Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah, what are your thoughts? What are your ideas on
Um,
this
well,
topic?
first of all, I mean, yes, like you have to. Um, Sometimes, a lot of times, it might be accidental. You might not kind of realize that you're making connections until time has gone on and they've solidified, right? So someone that you might be talking to here in class, you might end up kind of, maybe you take some of the same classes together, right? But as time goes on, maybe you don't really talk anymore outside the program, things like that. But what if you run into that person later on? Or so for example, like if a classmate then goes into the publishing world, right? And then you want to publish, oh, well, they're at this agency, let's reach out to them. I know them, I talked to them, we bonded over writing, or you could stay in contact, right? You could continue working together and supporting each other. So it could be as simple as that. But then it's also the different events that and programs that schools put on. A lot of times there will be, you know, alum that come in or big speakers or conferences that you're able to
Yeah,
go to because there's a partnership between the program. I know UW, all of the students and instructors, they got a free weekend pass to AWP, right? And so being able to go there and walking around the vendors room and just all these different literary magazines and publishers and getting all of their like little cards and stuff and
yeah,
just the exposure,
yeah.
right? So it's just, yeah, it's just be open. I know it's scary. We're all shy. Writers, we are shy.
Yeah.
Even when we're not, we're shy. Okay. Um, and since it feels weird trying to network, right?
It can
Networking.
feel fake, there
Yes.
in 505, that's the introductory course of the program, which I teach most terms. And, there's like a question on the final exam in that class that's kind of, I don't remember exactly how it's phrased, but it's something like, how can you leverage your connections
Right.
in the writing community, to help you succeed? And a lot of people respond negatively to that and say, well,
Mm,
I don't like the idea of leveraging my connections. But I don't think it has to have a negative connotation. I don't
right.
think it's like you're using people,
Right.
for selfish ends. It's more like you are, um, I don't know, just,
You're being you're not that's not the word I want. You're using discretion in a way of like you're kind of understanding how to navigate your relationships, right? I guess if I can give a quick outside of academia example, um, long time ago, before before I published The Missing, I was looking for an agent. And in doing so, with other projects, I was in communication with this agent. Um, I think she's with Kimberly Cameron and Associates in San Francisco. And we would always get really close, right? I'd send something and not all agent. It's very rare you're going to get an agent to reply to your query, right? Even rarer for them to reply substantially. But this agent would talk to me, right? And she'd say, I really love this, but I don't think it's right now. I'd love to work with you, keep sending. And so we had this kind of conversations happening. And one year I ended up signing with someone else. And there was like a year after that, the other agent had just emailed me to just be like, hey, just checking in, seeing how you're doing. That's wild. So that was a connection that when I ended up realizing that the relationship with my signed agent, business wise, was not, it wasn't the best for either of us, right? We just weren't a good fit.
Yeah.
I did not know what to do. So I reached out to the other agent and I said, and I think this is what I'm trying to say about leveraging, right? Where it's not a negative thing. And I had kind of told her, I said, I have a question for you. The agent that I'm with, this is kind of the situation. What do you recommend? Do you have any advice on how to go about doing X, Y, Z? And she guided me through the process of, because I think I was like 21, 22. So I was just like, oh, how do I do this? Right? What do I do? Business. Um, but that connection ultimately, I leveraged it,
Yeah.
right? And in a way,
And
kind of told her, hey, I'm unagented
yes.
now.
Right. No,
You
seriously,
know?
but there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's
Right.
not like a black mark against your character or
But you
anything.
feel like it is.
Yeah.
It felt like I was going behind, it felt like I was going behind the back of another agent.
Right.
And I'm like, they're gonna know my name's gonna be smeared because it is a small world sometimes with the
No,
agents, you know?
it is. It is. It is. But I mean, you know, there's a difference between malicious behavior
Right.
and behavior that's just like, I don't know, just you're just trying to do your best as a writer and make it in a very difficult profession.
Yeah.
And, you know, as long as you're acting with integrity towards your fellow
Yeah.
writers, I don't think there's anything negative there about, I don't know, calling upon your friends
Right.
and your relationships because you would do the same for them, and you
Right.
will. I mean, that's the thing, all of this stuff. Like, a writer's career is long and it has a lot of ups and downs, and
Yeah.
the people are going to similarly have their ups and downs. You're going to know people who are suddenly elevated to high positions of authority within the field, like you mentioned, somebody becomes
Yeah.
an agent, somebody becomes an editor, or my current agent began as my editor
Mm.
for my first novel. They bought my first novel, and they then they joined my the agency that I was
Yeah.
a client of, and then I moved over to them as my agent. So you just never know, right, where people are
Right.
going to end up. So I hope that listening to this, students can feel a little bit more at ease and less guilty, maybe,
Yeah.
about, you know,
You
it
have
does,
to
it's
advocate for
hard. It's
yourself.
hard. Yes, it's hard to phrase it in a way that can't
Right.
be undercut. But it's like, if you're part of a community of friends and colleagues, you really are trying to lift all of them up, and they're
Right.
trying to do the same for you.
Yeah, and it's something I think that especially students in workshops at any level run into is this feeling. I wouldn't say it's competition, but I think every person has kind of an internal competing with other people just because we want to do our best, right?
Right.
And I think sometimes that can be like just a barrier in general of getting used to things like workshop is
Yeah.
how do you support each other when you might feel like someone is doing something better than you are, right?
Yeah.
You're not as good as them. And I think,
Yeah.
as we continue to expand what is good writing, right? Outside of a good or bad polarity and into just writing is diverse. People don't all write the same and they shouldn't, right? I feel like that kind of helps create a more naturally supportive environment, right? Because we're all doing different things because we're different people.
Right.
And I like that you used the word integrity. I think I'd also add authenticity,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, we're all struggling. We're on the struggle bus together, y'all. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that brings us to the end of our chat. We've had a very quick hour.
yeah.
Jericho, I want to thank you so much.
Do you want to see my cat?
Yeah, man, bring him over.
He just came
Wow.
over. He woke up from his nap and he was like, "You're
Uh-huh.
on video, and I don't want that." Anyway,
So what's your cat's name?
Nico.
Nico. Like,
He's
like,
usually cuter. He was very grumpy because I grabbed him. But
Okay,
yeah.
so is that a Neko?
No, it's everybody asks that. It's not Neko, it's Nico. Because
Nico.
I wanted
Okay.
to name him I forgot what it was. It was some Russian name, and my girlfriend
Yeah.
was like, I can't pronounce that, so Nico. And I was like, oh, that's a good compromise.
Okay. But is that like a Nico Case, or is it like Nico from the Velvet Underground, or what?
Like
Or just
Nico, just
yeah,
like
just
Nico,
just the
Nikolai,
name.
but shorter.
Oh, okay. Okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, I hope everyone will join us on the next edition
Yeah.
of Introduce Your Cat.
Yeah, I have to. It's a given.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you,
you
everyone.
absolutely do. Yes,
Thank you so much for all the questions and comments. I saw them all. So if I I wish we could have touched on everything, but thank you very much.
yeah, well, we'll have you back at some point, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And everybody, the next one will be in a month. So I hope to see you there. And until then, take care and keep writing.